Hey guys, welcome to another whiskey review. My name is Andrew, and tonight we've got a real crowd pleaser for my bourbon loving friends. We've got the Old Rip Van Winkle 10-year. This is the 2011 bottling. As I mentioned in the last couple of videos, this fall, at least for a few weeks, I'm going to do a few higher end or limited edition or rarer scotches and bourbons, since this is the time of year where a lot of you may be looking to make that once a year big splash purchase. You might be opening up the pocketbook a little bit for a Christmas present for yourself or someone else. You're just kind of in the mood to hunt whiskey this fall if you're anything like me. So tonight, Old Rip Van Winkle 10-year. Before I get into the tasting, I'll tell you a little bit about the Van Winkle line, about this whiskey in particular. I am by no means a bourbon historian. There are guys that are members of WBSC that can tell you way more about stitzel-weller and Van Winkle than I can. But just a brief rundown before we get into the whiskey so you know exactly what we're tasting here. So I've actually got some notes. I just did some quick research today. The stitzel-weller distillery was sold by the Van Winkle family in 1972, but Van Winkle still retained the Old Rip Van Winkle label. So stitzel-weller continued to contract distill for the Van Winkle family, and they bottled Old Rip Van Winkle, but then stitzel-weller closed in 1992. During that time, all through the 90s, the Van Winkle family continued to bottle Old Rip Van Winkle using aged stitzel-weller stocks, and also using, at least in part, some wheated bourbon from the Bernheim facility. And there is a time, it's kind of foggy as far as I could tell, where stitzel-weller also contracted with what was then the Ancient Age distillery, you might know it better today as Buffalo Trace, to also use some of that stock in the Old Rip line. So anything in the 90s could have had any combination of stitzel-weller, Ancient Age, and Bernheim distillate in it. Now in 2002, when the stitzel-weller stocks were pretty much gone, the Van Winkles partnered with what's now the Buffalo Trace distillery to have Buffalo Trace start contract distilling the Old Rip Van Winkle line, the Pappy Van Winkle line, and they started bottling there, doing everything through Buffalo Trace. That started in 2002. So this bottling, being the 2011 bottling, and having a 10-year age statement, means that the youngest juice in this bottle had to have been distilled in 2001, pre-Buffalo Trace partnership, which means everything in here is most likely a combination of stitzel-weller distillate and Bernheim distillate. It may have a little bit of Ancient Age in it too. There's really no way to tell. Of course, all of it is wheated bourbon, which means there's no rye in the mash bill. It's a combination of corn, at least 51%, wheat, and malted barley. I don't know the percentages. You may be able to find it. I didn't look that far into it. But this, of course, is mostly known for its name. Anything with Van Winkle on the label is worth hundreds and hundreds in the secondary market, getting close to impossible to find at retail. I was lucky enough that a really great guy named Bill Harper sent me this sample, and so we'll dig right into it. Old Rip Van Winkle 10-year, 2011 bottling. We'll start with the nose. Up front, the first thing I notice is a really nice, sweet and spicy, like a cinnamon bread pudding note. Behind that, there's some sweet caramel and something like a sweet vanilla, like vanilla frosting. Those three notes in tandem really form a beautiful aroma here. It's concentrated. There's no tickle from the ethanol or anything like that. This is bottled at 107 proof or 53.5% alcohol by volume, so a real good hefty proof here. But just a silky nose, beautiful, concentrated, slightly bready, definitely sweet, but enough cinnamon spice to really provide a nice complementary dimension along with the sweetness. Uh, Overall, boy, this is an excellent nose. Underneath those flavors I just mentioned, there's a nice soft layer of oak that really makes this a nice and well-rounded and really pleasant nose. Let's move into the palate. Upon entry, the alcohol does assert itself with a pretty moderate entry burn that crescendos mid-palate before finally tapering off near the finish. It's not too distracting. It's definitely not overwhelming. Uh, you do get a real good amount of a tangier here, a tangy caramel, a lot of cherry, things like orange, maybe like blood orange. They provide a nice fruity, almost citrusy tang, slightly acidic. There is still a good amount of caramel, cinnamon spice, a dark, almost burnt toffee or brulee sugar maybe. The body is nice and syrupy. One thing I will critique this body for, unlike the nose, everything in here is a bit muddled, a bit, cluttery, if you will. The flavors don't seem all that cohesive, but they almost seem like they're kind of wrestling for attention. Everything is kind of flirting around the edges of my palate. It comes and it goes. Like I said, that's kind of nitpicking, really getting in depth here. But I mean, that's the point of these reviews, And so overall, it's still a very enjoyable palate. We'll do one more sip, we'll get the finish. Yeah, the second sip there was even more fruit forward than the first one. And then the finish really gets astringent, not in a super unpleasant way. Maybe drying is a better term. Tannic. I think tannic is the word I'm looking for here on the finish. Tobacco, cherry pits, more of a tart cherry, dark brown sugar, a little bit of charcoal. And then, oddly enough, as I've been talking here, the finish has actually sweetened up. It's a really long finish. It's still just as intense coating my mouth as it was right after I swallowed. Started out tannic and astringent. Now it's starting to sweeten back up into some more juicier cherry notes and a nice, more of a clean, moderate toffee. The finish is really rewarding. Like I said, the palate, while good, was kind of cluttered, jumbled, muddled, but the finish really picks back up kind of where the nose left off, leaves you with a real nice memory of those fruits, toffee, sweet and spice, just enough drying oak to really keep it balanced. Overall, this is a nice whiskey. I'm not going to crown this whiskey the king of bourbon, but overall, it's definitely enjoyable. I could certainly sip this. I'll give it a score, and I'll talk about this whiskey in today's market, and we'll wrap up. Let's see. $83 out of 100. Before you flame me, and you can flame me later, that's perfectly okay. Do remember that my rating scale is a true 100-point scale, so don't think of this like a B-. It's not a letter scale, but where 55 is exactly average on a 100-point scale, anything 80 to 90 would be what I would term excellent. It's more than good, it's very good. 83, falls right in the middle of that very good range from 80 to 89, and so that score is meant to reflect the fact that I do enjoy this pour, but I don't think it's phenomenal. I don't think this is in the top echelon of bourbon or whiskey in general. It's just a good, high quality pour. There's nothing special. There are a couple things that are a bit detracting for me when I compare it to its peers. And so that brings me now to the price, both in monetary value and time value, of purchasing this whiskey. Especially one, an older bottling, 2011, you know, it's got the squat bottle, the screw top. This is going to be a hard whiskey for anybody to find, and I'm going to not just speak about the 2011 bottling in general, but about Old Rip Van Winkle 10-year as a whole. You guys can argue with me if you think that's unfair. If you want, we can discuss that later. But using this as kind of a poster for the label as a whole, I would gladly drop between $50 and $80 for a bottle of this bourbon. I would not spend more. At more than that, which it will most likely be, you are paying to have the words Old Rip Van Winkle 10-year on a label with a very good but not great whiskey inside. I've seen this whiskey go for several $100s almost instantly in secondary markets, even on store shelves. Some what I would call less scrupulous store owners and managers will put what is meant to be at MSRP a $50 or $60 bottle of bourbon on the shelf for sale for $300, $400, $500, and they'll sucker more than enough people into buying it at that price without thinking twice. And you know what? I say this all the time. Ultimately, a bourbon's value is whatever somebody is willing to pay for it. And so my hope is to help people see that unless you're buying a trophy, which, if that's your thing, fine. Unless you're buying a trophy to sit on a shelf and you really want to have that big Old Rip Van Winkle label on your shelf so you can show your friends, don't drop big dollars for this bourbon. It's great. It is not transcendental. It is not worth hundreds of dollars based on the juice inside. So if you're buying a drink, which I think a lot of my enthusiast friends are, not buying to show, not just buying to own, but buying because you want to drink damn good whiskey, think twice before dropping secondary value dollar amounts on this whiskey. That's all I've got to say. I think I will do one more thing. I almost forgot. Just for the last couple of minutes, I'm going to add a little bit of water. See if that does anything to improve this whiskey. Just small amounts. This is a 1/4 teaspoon, so I added a 1/2 teaspoon total. A lot of times, when you add water to whiskey, you're not adding water to it because it's too hot or, anything like that. You're adding small amounts, even drops at a time, to a whiskey to see if it fundamentally changes the profile, either for better or for worse. When you add water to a whiskey, what it does is it changes the molecular structure, the chemical compound. It breaks molecules apart. It forms compounds together. It's going to release new aromas. It's going to allow new flavor compounds to show up on the palate. That's the point of adding water. And so we'll see if it changes it maybe for the better. If anything, the nose is a bit more muted. You still get the cinnamon bread pudding, but whatever fruit might have been there before, faint as it was, is totally gone now. It's just a bit thinner as a whole on the nose. Same with the palate. It's not better. I'm going to hesitate to call it worse, but I'm going to call it a lot thinner. It's a little bit more oaky, a little bit more of a sweet cherry, but you really lose a lot of the spice. You lose that nice syrupy body. Same thing on the finish. It sweetens the fruit. It hides the tannic notes. Overall, I would probably take it without water. If you've got a whole bottle or you've got multiple pours, try it with and without. It did not make it significantly worse, but it certainly didn't make it better. I'll go ahead and wrap up now. Cheers, WVSC. I hope you have a great night. We'll be back with more whiskey reviews next week. So, cheers.